Lots going on in the world of rugby, and we're going to discuss it in the company of Ruaidhri O'Connor of the Irish Independent, of course, here in studio. Thank you for coming in.
No worries, hi Joe.
Ian Madigan is with us. Nearly 300 professional games to his name. Irish International, Leinster, Bordeaux, Bristol and Ulster. Ian, great to have you on again.
Yeah, thanks again for having me on. Really enjoyed the show last week.
So there's quite a few things going on. Irish squad announcement on Wednesday. Caelan Doris is captain for November. URC action to come at the weekend. All four Irish provinces play on the Saturday this week. Munster are still in South Africa. They're against the Sharks at 3 o'clock. Leinster will have the comforts of home. The Lions at 5:15. And then Saturday evening, Connacht and Ulster, both in action at 7:35. Ulster away to Cardiff and Connacht are at home. The Dragons are coming to Galway. And that is not to mention the most intriguing story of the week in Irish rugby. Johnny Sexton in from the cold. This is not a drill. Mm-hmm. So let's start there. Jerry Thornley had the story in the Irish Times yesterday. We're still, I think, learning about the nature of the role, but what we do know is it will be very much part-time. It will be in the main restricted to working with the Irish out-halves, a mentoring type role. He will absolutely have input in the Six Nations, and there is a possibility he will be involved in November as well. And the sense seems to be it's kind of a once-a-week thing. He's not by any means on the grass in a tracksuit day in, day out across a campaign. But let's be honest, he'll get there. Mm-hmm. So for very surprising news, it's also some of the least surprising news I've ever heard, Ruaidhri O'Connor. Sexton was very open about the fact that the idea of coaching attracted him massively. Like that, we should set that context. I mean, he knew, of course, his personality, his love of rugby, what he felt he had to offer. All of these boxes were ticked. His big issue was twofold. One, he felt, and he talked about this at the Bord Gáis Theatre, that if he was going to go into coaching, he would have to travel Ronan O'Gara style to different countries and learn from different teams. And he told a story that night about Leo Cullen coming to him when Nasewa had retired and said, "We've got to get Nasewa as part of the coaching ticket. Let's convince him." And Johnny said, "Do we? He's no new ideas for us. I mean, I love Issa as much as anyone, but do we really need him?" So it's new ideas which he feels are crucial if he's going to become a proper coach, and he does not want to travel with his children and Dublin and grandparents and school. And then I guess the second issue for him is job security, and he kind of said, where can I walk into a big job and base myself for 10 or 15 years and not get the sack, as Leo Cullen shifted in his chair, I suspect. But obviously with this situation, none of those parameters apply really. So I can see why he said, okay, that sounds interesting.
It's a smart move from Andy Farrell, from David Humphreys, from Sexton himself. If there is, I would presume that they've been working on Sexton for a while to say, we would like you, they don't want all of that, for want of a better phrase, IP walking out the door and never having any input into Irish rugby at all. I'm sure Leinster had conversations as well, and you can understand his reservations, but I think he's being a bit too humble there. If he went into Leinster, there's really no need for him to leave Dublin. I think he has. Obviously, we don't know how good a coach he'd be, but we have a fairly good idea. As long as he's able to relate the ideas in his head, the things that made him such a great player, and kind of learn how to transpose those to other people, how to coach, how to be that teacher, which he's watched all the greats over the last couple of years. He has the detail, he sees the picture. I think he could be a very successful coach. But I have an interview with Sean O'Brien in Saturday's paper, and Sean O'Brien's about 2 or 3 years down the road on this, and I remember listening to him when he initially went into coaching, and he was reluctant because it is a different gig. Because as a player, you can go home, you can leave it all behind you. You've done your work. Whereas a coach, you have to be a little bit obsessed, a little bit crazy. It eats up your time. It eats up your week. Your weekends. A club coach means every weekend you're either travelling or you've got a home game. It's relentless. Whereas Paul O'Connell went into international coaching because he has these very specific windows, and then he has a break in between. And look, Sexton, I think, will be a very good coach. I would have no doubt that he has the knowledge, he has the charisma, he has the personality, he has the respect of the dressing room already. I know you need to earn it again as a coach. And this is a nice way of him finding out whether he wants to do it. And also, it's a way of Farrell kind of future-proofing the team, surrounding his tens with someone who knows what they're going through. And also, I'd say Caelan Doris, as the new captain, would like to have him as a sounding board. I see it as a win-win. I don't see any drawback for it.
Yes. Ian, you shared a Leinster dressing room with Johnny Sexton and Irish setup as well, 09 to 16, give or take. Obviously, he went to Paris the year before that. If you were Jack Crowley or Kieran Frawley or Sam Prendergast at the ages they are, at the stages of their career that they are, how would you feel about the news that Sexton is coming on board?
I'd be happy with it. I think where Johnny's going to come in and help is going to be really important for guys who've got limited experience. You look at their age profile at 24, 21, how you speak to other players, how you speak to coaches. It's not just the technical side that Johnny can help with. But to your point earlier on, Johnny coming in a day a week, like where he can add value is being on the training park. The team being 15 minutes into a session, things not going well. Sam Prendergast pulls the guys into a huddle. Johnny's standing behind it. He can hear what's being said. He can have a coffee with him later in the day and go, what did you think of what you said there? What did you think of the response you got off the players? Jack Crowley can have a chat with him before the New Zealand game, talk about the playbook and, maybe open up to Johnny about his nerves and, what plays do you think we should start with this week? But what play do you like, Jack? What play do you think is suited to the team? What do you think is going to get most players on the ball? I'm having issues with kicking from this area of the pitch when I'm out on the ride on the 15-meter line. I can't really pick my line. Stuff that Johnny would have gone through in his career that he can share. Well, this is what I visualized, or what I did was I made the kick much harder and then I made it easier and then I went back to make the kick, simplified it. And when I'm standing over it, I convinced myself that I actually love this kick, whereas maybe an hour ago I was saying to myself that I don't like it. So it's stuff that's not as obvious. Like, younger players now, they're really polished, they have all the answers, but it's when you get them out of their comfort zone and they open up to you, or you can see how they're reacting in the heat of battle, either in a game or in training. That's where Johnny can add the real nuggets. And even you couple that with Caelan Doris being 26, like these guys, like they're not the finished article. They know that themselves, and that's where Johnny can add real value.
What's interesting is what you're describing there is a more hands-on role, really, than what we're initially hearing is going to be the case. The benefit of being on the training ground, hearing those interactions between Prendergast and the group, and being able to see how things are going, and then that informs his coffee later on. So really, to get the full benefits, you almost want him there at training almost all day, and maybe he'll do that. But then, of course, Johnny's it would be so respected, and especially with Andy Farrell, who's been coaching phase play attack, not present come Six Nations owing to his line sabbatical. Then you have a situation where they're running some moves and they're not quite working, and before you know it, Johnny's coaching attack, because everybody's going to turn to him and say, you're standing there in the sideline. I know, okay, you're just looking after the out halves, but just say you weren't for a second. What would you do in this scenario? And, Bob's your uncle, Johnny Sexton, attack coach 2026.
The guy has never done anything in half measures. So that, like, with him coming in, maybe he starts off and he's looking at their goal kicking technique, and then that grows to, well, will you have a look at how they're kicking to touch, or we could do with them getting a bit more airtime on their restarts, and then how the 9 and 10 is functioning. We'd like it to be a bit better. Would you have a look at that? And then before you know it, it's like, will you have a look at these backline plays?
Well, yeah.
And we're getting held up in our attack. What do you think the issue is, John? Well, maybe our breakdown's holding us back. So look, Andy Farrell's a really smart guy. And look, Johnny's also really smart. Like, he'll know that by committing, even if it's just one day a week, he'll know that the likelihood of him getting sucked in is very high.
Yeah.
But as Rod mentioned there, the IP that he has, there is so much that Johnny wants to offer and where he thinks the game is going, and his ability to stay ahead of the game, and as an aging player, to be able to adapt his game. That shows you that this guy is going to be a fantastic coach, because he's always thinking ahead. He is not a copycat. He's not looking at what other teams are doing well. He's thinking, what can we do better, and where is the game going?
Would any part of you at that age worry about the dynamic that his personality, which I think, to be fair, we've talked about it a lot of late, Johnny Sexton's personality. There's no doubt he's eased back a touch in terms of that forceful aspect to his character. But would any part of you at that age worry that he would be too domineering a presence, that he'd be a looming presence? If you missed a kick, would you worry that the camera might cut to him in the stand? You are trying to make your way in the game, trying to establish yourself as the number 10. And so people have wondered, well, do you necessarily want an icon? And like an icon who was still playing 12 months ago, do you want that as part of the ecosystem? Would that be a worry for you?
No, it wouldn't, and I don't think it would be for the guys that are in there. Their goal is to be the best version of themselves, and if they think that Johnny's going to help that, the camera cutting to him in the stands, or maybe being a bit intimidated or feeling a bit nervous around him initially, you'll quickly get over that and realize that he is going to be the guy that is going to push you to be the best version of yourself. And yeah, I'd certainly be happy to have him in around the training camp and someone who I can lean on through the good times and the bad.
Rory, do you see any downsides to this?
Not really. I can understand why people might look from afar and wonder about that, but I don't think he's going to be in the ground. Like, I don't think he's going to be in the coaching box necessarily during games. I certainly, from what Jerry's reported, it sounds like it's less formal than that. Obviously, that might happen down the road. I think the three players we're talking about are fairly comfortable in their own skins. I sat down with Sam Prendergast as part of a group interview on Monday, and he is about as confident a 21-year-old as you'll ever meet. And I think he firmly believes that he doesn't need that much help to get there. He'll take the help when it's going, but he's an interesting part of this. Sexton's one of the best defensive tens the game has seen, and that's where Sam Prendergast needs to improve. I think everyone can see he's got the game. He's going to start against the Lions on Saturday, but he needs to nail that defensive part, and even just the psychology that Johnny brought into defending, how he valued it more. His little kind of sit downs with Sam Prendergast will be really valuable. Also, it would be naive to think that these conversations haven't been happening anyway. Jack Crowley rang Johnny Sexton while he was still playing, while he was essentially going for the same jersey, and said, look, can you help me? And Sexton did, and that line of communication has remained open ever since. I don't know for sure that Frawley is, but they shared a dressing room for the last couple of years of his career. I know even Johnny, I don't know which interview it was, but he made sure that Prendergast got a shout out when they were talking about the other 10s. He rates Prendergast. He definitely sees him as the future. So I'd imagine he is available to all these players anyway, because he wants, ultimately, it's not about Johnny. He wants Ireland and Leinster to succeed because they're the two teams that he invested so heavily into. So I don't see him being, he doesn't see himself as being competitive with them because he's finished. He just wants Ireland to succeed, and he wants these players to succeed. And I don't think he's going to be protectionist about his legacy. I think he would actually see it as a bird, almost burnishing his legacy if the guys who came after him were strong. He doesn't want to see Ireland fall off a cliff. And also, I do think the C-suite of this team is kind of disappearing. The people who've ruled the roost are O'Mahony won't be in Portugal next week because he's at home with Munster. Earls is gone. Johnny's gone. So really, of the guys over 30, you're looking at Conor Murray and Cian Healy, neither of whom are kind of big tone setters off the pitch. So I think having Johnny there, even when Farrell's away during the Six Nations, just has a bit of continuity with that dressing room hierarchy and kind of the people who set the vocal tone in there and kind of set the standards around the place. So I think there'll be a bit of that as well. Farrell won't be there himself, but he's looking at, how do I make sure that when this new generation come in, who we all know are quieter, more introverted, Doris is a different kind of captain, he's trying to make sure that he's trying to future-proof the team around that as well, I think.
Yeah. Ian, as a matter of interest, and it's a very different relationship to Sexton being your coach, but when you were at Leinster, and I guess, for want of a better word, you were understudy, it doesn't strike me he would have been massively going out of his way to help a potential competitor for jersey. What was that relationship like at club level? You're smiling, so you can take us where you want. But what was that relationship like when you're going for the same jersey in effect?
I think when you're going head to head, and when I say head to head, the first against the seconds, typically I'd have been lining out for the seconds, but it was so competitive in Leinster. I think back to some of the guys who I was playing with there that were vying for the first choice spots, like you'd Sean Cronin, Ricard Strauss, Ferg McFadden, Luke Fitzgerald, myself and Johnny, Owen Redden, Isaac Boss. Like there was whether you're on the first or the seconds, you believe that you should have been starting for Leinster at the weekend, and as a result, the trainings on the Tuesday and the Thursday session were incredibly intense and really competitive. And when I was coming up against Johnny there, yeah, look, there was a couple of times where things would have boiled over and a late hit went in here and there, or you dipped the shoulder, and that's part of being competitive. But when it came to the close skill stuff, so like whether it was helping me with my goal kicking or drop goals or restarts, which I struggled with for parts of my career, or line touch kicking, Johnny was actually really forthcoming in helping other players around him in the close skill. And when it came to, managing the game plan and the playbook as such, he would be sure to find a window in your week, because he would have had more face-to-face time with Joe, whether it was with Leinster or Ireland, and he would want to make sure that the players on the bench are up to speed. So he'd be like, here, look, by the way, I spoke to Joe about this on Thursday. We've tweaked this slightly. So if you are coming on, make sure that you do this. So it wasn't like he was withholding information, but as a competitor, he is absolutely ferocious. But that's what drives the team on to win.
And was he good in those closed skill sessions, kicking, restarts, good communicator, helped?
Yeah, he was. He was very, gave me some great pointers that certainly stood me well. Right. Typically when you're practicing goal kicking, you'll do all the, your restarts, your line kicking, and then you'll dial in for the goal kicking, which is obviously the most important part of it. So you'll go off and maybe kick for 15, 20 minutes, and typically you'll come back together then for a competition. Richie Murphy used to run those, and it would typically be 2 picks for me, 2 picks for Johnny, and then Richie would pick 2 places to kick from. Ferg would obviously have got involved over the years, but that was, regardless of how your kicking had gone to that point, whoever won that competition, ultimately Joe was going to find out. And, it might only be for a coffee, but you wanted to be that winner. And those kicking competitions were so intense, you could hear a pin drop. And some very awkward car journeys off the
I mean, you could hold your own off a tee. I'd say you won a few.
I won a few, all right, and Johnny won his fair few, and so did Ferg, and Richie used to get involved as well. Yeah, but like that was great, and while I was very much Johnny's understudy, you're looking for any sort of edge you can get. Like I was thinking, if I can bench press more than him, if I can squat more than him, if I can keep winning these kicking competitions, if I can run a faster speed than him, it's all going to help. And ultimately, I wanted the strength and conditioning coach saying to Joe, Ian's lifting better. I wanted Richie saying, Ian won the kicking competition on a Tuesday. But it meant that I was thinking about absolutely every aspect of my game. I wanted my skin folds to be lower than him. It was obsessive. But ultimately, I absolutely loved having Johnny there, because people think, if he wasn't there, you could have played more for Leinster and more for Ireland. Yeah, but I also mightn't have been as good as I was. And off the back of learning off him, it gave me opportunities to leave Leinster and go and play in Europe. And yeah, I certainly don't hold a grudge there anyway.
That's so interesting. It speaks to your diligence and your professionalism, because it would have been very, very easy and understandable for you to say, well, listen, no matter what I do, I'm not going to play ahead of Sexton. So, you know what, I will have that extra bit of chocolate on a Saturday night. But it almost went the other way, which is very striking.
Yeah, and that's where, I think for Sam and Frawley and Crowley, the way Johnny does it, look, it worked for him, it worked for Leinster, and worked for Ireland. But there's other ways of doing it. And it took me a while to realize that, because when someone like Johnny is getting as much success as he was in speaking to people the way he was, running the week the way he did, how he conducted himself on the pitch, you think that that's the way to do it. But there are other ways to do it. And when I think back to my time in France, I definitely got things wrong with how I spoke to the French players. And, in Leinster and Ireland, you can be very direct. Irish people can take it, and that's a great thing about it. But when I went over to France, I was too direct. I said it in too abrupt ways, and I definitely lost a few guys in the initial time that I was there. And I only had 12 months in France, and it took a while to kind of win rapport and trust back from them. And I think that's important for the three out halves coming through. They need to figure out, how do they want to run the weeks? How do they want to stand up in front of the group and speak? How do they want to deal with the coaches? Maybe they can take the best parts of Johnny, but you've also got to be yourself. And, personality is a massive part of playing out half.
Yeah. Well, don't worry. We're going to do a Run the Week special with you at some stage around Kieran Frawley, because that's been this kind of thing in the background with him for the last year or two. Just one last one, and we'll get into the squad then with Rory in a bit more depth. I'm curious, be as specific as you like. And I suppose what I'm asking here, is there an aspect of Johnny's game that you thought, oh man, he's so good at that. If I'd love to master that. You're sitting down with him as a 22, 23, 24-year-old. You get to ask him some questions. Straight away, what are you saying to him? How do you do X? Tell me more about how you do Y. Where are you going in terms of the questions?
I think for younger out halves, like the three guys in the squad, it's figuring out with their decision process, what is the best thing to do for the team at that given time. Johnny was particularly good at that. He gets penalty advantage. He goes for the big pass. It's over the top. It gets intercepted. It's not the end of the world. You're back for a penalty. I would have seen the long pass being on, no penalty advantage, gone for it. You get intercepted. The opposition score. The momentum comes out of the game. I always felt he had an edge on me on that kind of decision-making process. His ability to think phases ahead, which is a very hard thing to coach. Yeah. So if, for example, you've got a set-piece play and you've got a 3-4 phase power play lined up, and you get smashed back on the second phase, you haven't practiced that in training, but Johnny will have practiced that probably in the mind gym, and he'll know, if that carry doesn't go well, I'm going to Y. And moving away from what we'd pre-planned. But it's not only his ability to have done that on the power plays, it's when we get high in the phase count, when you're 13, 14 phases, you're gassed up, your forwards are carrying off the touchline and they get smashed. Johnny's gone, this is the right time to go back down the touchline. I know that I'm not going to be dealing with hard line speed there. The fence isn't coming off the line. Maybe that's the time to cut the cloth. The team are tired. I'm just going to get the ball off the pitch here. And he just grubbers the ball off the pitch for a 10-yard gain. Doesn't look like a whole lot, but he'll have known that his team were at high risk there, that if they got a turnover in the middle of the pitch, his team were low on petrol, there was a likelihood that they could potentially go the length. His ability to do that was particularly good. And I think as he spends more time with the out halves and they go through different clips and their thought process leading into it, I think they'll get a huge amount out of those conversations with him.
Yeah, I'll bet they will. Sounds amazing. I mean, you'd love to just eavesdrop on it all and learn yourself, wouldn't you? Irish squad at large, Rory, what jumped out to you?
Well, I mean, the captaincy is the big one. I know it had been flagged from a long way out, especially O'Mahony doing his hamstring in that Ospreys game. Paved the way, but really the way was paved in South Africa when O'Mahony was benched for that second test. Doris was given the arm, well, they don't wear an armband, but given the responsibility and played out of his skin. And also the way the Irish coaches went to bat for him in the week. Luke Pearce had spoken very kind of brushed them off a little bit in the game, and Simon Easterby came out so strong. So did Farrell, kind of publicly in a way that they don't normally do, to back this guy. And you knew then that the way he was being paid for Caelan Doris to take over. And much like they introduced Crowley into a very strong team last year, they've paused the long-term evolution of the team to make, I think partly to make life easier for the big changes they want to make. So Crowley comes into a really established team led by Peter O'Mahony, and he gets a year of that. And now, having brought in Joe McCarthy, a couple of other players, like Osborne gets to go at fullback last year, but really it's the core of the same team. Now Crowley's established. You've now got a new captain. The thing I like about it the most is that Caelan Doris will be 29 at the next World Cup, and we're not heading towards a World Cup with the same conversation we've had for the last two, where we worry that the captain is going to be too old. Now, Sexton proved, how many times we talked about it over the years, whether there was enough backup, whether he'd make it at 38. He did. He was brilliant. I would argue in 2019 that Joe Schmidt had hitched himself to Rory Best's wagon, and by the time we got to that point, Best was past his best, and they hadn't found an alternative because he had been the captain. Whereas this time, injury permitting, that Caelan Doris will be at the top of his game at the World Cup. That He's already probably the most important player in the team in terms of how they want to play. And now they're giving him 3 years as Leinster captain, as Ireland captain, to be the best leader, probably the Lions captain as well, to be the best leader he can be by Australia 2027. Otherwise, really, there was no surprises in that squad. Maybe they look a little bit light at prop. They've got coverage in the travelling reserves. I guess the good news is that Rob Herring and Ronan Kelleher are fit enough to go to Portugal, which means they should be fit enough. At least one of them should be fit enough to play against the All Blacks. That was the big area of concern. The rest of it is the team that went to South Africa, plus Hugo Keenan, Gibson Park and Mac Hansen, who missed that tour. So it's great continuity. Prendergast and Izuchukwu have had 6 months of investment. They'll get capped this month. The five players coming along for the ride. They'll probably get capped in Georgia and Romania next summer. There's a process here. You can see it unfolding. And there's no great need for Ireland to upset the apple cart. The age profile is not worrying. The team looks like it's a nice age profile. He's slowly making the changes as we go. But, they're the world's #1 team. They were one of the best teams at the World Cup last year. He's proven to be a very good selector. He's got a great eye for a player. When he wants to bring someone in like Osborne in South Africa, he does it. And there's a little bit of in Farrell we trust with it, And really, when you look at the people are kind of crying out to get in, you're talking about lads who are coming in to maybe play against Fiji. There's no Andy Reid. There's no cause celeb there that you're going, God, he should be in. Like, ultimately, that squad makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, there is a real in Andy we trust aspect to the whole thing. I guess the good news story is Jacob Stockdale. He scored 2 tries against Ospreys. Could have been a hat-trick. Would have been the first hat-trick of his career, which I was kind of surprised to read. I just thought somewhere along the line, not least in 18, he might have scored a hat-trick. So he has beaten 25 players this season in the URC, which is more than any other player. He had one of those trademark chip and collect tries in Pretoria against the Bulls. His Irish record, lest you need reminding, for a time was just outrageous. That famous season in 18, the Grand Slam game at Twickenham, when he scored that day, that was his 11th try in 9 test matches at that stage for a 22-year-old. I mean, it was completely unsustainable, but I don't think any of us suspected it would go off the cliff the way it has. And he said something interesting, I thought, Rory, after the Ospreys game. He said, about a year ago, I decided to focus on things I was good at and really go after those. I'd got away from that, I think. And it's funny, Joe Schmidt, I know from talking to Brian O'Driscoll in the years, Joe Schmidt gave that advice to O'Driscoll at a certain point that, yes, of course.
It was then McNulty, actually.
Was it McNulty?
I think it was McNulty, yeah. I think he got O'Driscoll to watch YouTube clips. YouTube would have been in its infancy, and he went and watched, look what you're good at.
That was
that.
You're right. You're right. I stand corrected. You're right. But O'Driscoll really bought into that methodology, which was, I'm world class at this. How about I get even more world class at this particular stuff? And so he instead of, oh God, am I as good at my weaknesses as I should be? I'm going to hone my excellent aspects. And it's funny. I was reading the Pep Linders book recently, and he was talking about Klopp. And Klopp, when he was looking at players, didn't necessarily want a 7 out of 10 in all aspects of the game player. He wanted exceptional characteristics. So freakish speed, freakish strength, freakish passing ability, rather than being 6, 7, 8 out of 10 at everything. He kind of wanted that X-Men aspect. What's someone like freakishly good at? And I can work with the rest. And so I think there's something kind of interesting, Ian, about Stockdale saying, do you know what? Yeah, look, my defence. I'm sure he's sick of hearing about his defence. And it's not for nothing he's hearing about it. But you know what? If you go back to scoring 11 tries in 9 test matches, that's no bad thing either.
Completely. And I know he's put a lot of work into the mental side of his game, working with a sports psychologist up north.
Right.
And we're definitely seeing it. He's back playing with a smile on his face. The other thing with Jacob as well, it's important to note, he did have he had a very nasty heel injury, which took the guts of a year to get back from. And
were you were there then? Were you? Were you up there then?
I was there then. Okay. Yeah, and he was incredibly diligent with his rehab and being a positive influence around the squad. Popular guy in the Ulster squad is Jacob, but I really liked hearing that. Ultimately, Jacob, you're phenomenally good at beating people one-on-one. When you do go into contact, you're really strong. You drive your legs well. You're very good under the air, under a high ball, and you kick the ball an absolute mile. Just do those 4 or 5 things really well. I personally don't think his defence is that big an issue.
Right.
I think if he's confident in other areas of his game, he defends far better. When he's talking about like focusing on the things he does well, I actually don't think he's like saying, I'm not actually worrying about my defense.
Sure,
He
sure, sure.
definitely is. Like
But
the
I
way
suspect
wingers
he
are
means
now,
I'm not obsessing
yeah.
about my weakness, maybe in a way that I might have been in 19, 20, 21.
Exactly. And we demand so much more of wingers now than we would have even like 15 years ago. And the trendy thing for wingers was, can they get in and be the second set of hands? Can they work off their wing really well? And that actually doesn't suit Jacob's game. Like his hand speed, his catch pass, that's not what he does. He's good at getting the ball in his hands and running at players, beating them one on one. What I spoke about there is one of Mac Hansen's strengths. His
Yeah.
his ability to work off his wing, be that extra set of hands. But don't try and be someone else. Like you're Jacob Stockdale, you're a brilliant winger. And if I'm playing with him at out half, I'm just thinking if I can get that ball out to the left wing 10, 15 times in a game and get his hands on the ball, something is going to happen probably 4 or 5 times, and he'll probably come away with some line breaks and some tries. Having that in a team is so valuable. Now, the issue is obviously you've got James Lowe there ahead of him, and you don't necessarily want to be playing someone on the right wing with a left foot. And then do you put, the other options there, or do you then look at putting him in at fullback and moving Keenan to the right wing, which I don't think they'll do. So you're probably looking, will he start instead of Lowe in one of the other games? I really hope he does, and he certainly will deserve it.
And just the last one, he has spoken in the past, a younger man at the time, I suspect, when he was doing it, but about going into dressing rooms and quite literally taking out his phone and looking at what was being said about him on Twitter after a game. Did he strike you as somebody that could be susceptible to a crisis of confidence or sensitive person? And sensitive is not a derogatory term, but that kind of personality type?
Yeah, I think for any young guy who hits the highs that he hit in the early parts of his career, like you talk about like 11 tries from 9 games, 2008 player of the Six Nations, like that's a huge accolade to pick up.
2018. If he was player of the year in 08, that'd be bloody impressive.
Yeah, like you've set such a high bar for yourself. And you couple that with some injuries, you couple that with an Ulster team that has really, struggled to stay consistent over the last eight years. He's been, within that. Had he been in a Leinster backline, would they be able to manage him better, give him better opportunities? Yeah, I think they probably would have. But look, he's out the other side of it now. He's got his hand up for selection. He's still young enough to be a key part of Ireland's next World Cup cycle. So.
I'm pretty sure he's younger than James Lowe was when he made his debut for Ireland. Wow. So if he wants to think about how he can have a second act in Irish shirts, that's one way of framing it. I know Ian said he has a smile on his face. What I liked about him, particularly in the Connacht game a couple of weeks ago, was that he had a snarl on his face, that he went after Mac Hansen in a kind of a physical confrontation. And one of the criticisms I would have had about Jacob over the years is maybe he's a bit too passive, that he's let things happen to him in his career.
It's funny, I remember watching the Ireland selection against New Zealand selection at the RDS. I was watching that game in studio in Virgin with Alan Quinlan, and he said it on air. Very frustrated with the lack of aggression in his game generally.
For a big man, a guy who can dominate physically. I thought he took the European game between, or was it the URC game between Leinster and Ulster at the Aviva last season by the scruff of the neck. It was him who popped up, made plays for his team. Richie came up with a really clever game plan, and it was Stockdale was central to it. That would have caught the Irish coach's eyes. He's been in every squad. He's lost his central contract, but he's still been kept around, and they're keeping him around for a reason. He's unfortunate that Lowe is still ahead of him, but he's narrowing that gap to some degree. He probably needs a big November in training. He needs to go to Portugal and dominate. There's changes to the laws coming in terms of the interpretation. The referees will be enforcing the protection of, the escorting around kick chasing, so that it's going to be much easier to contest balls in the air as an attacking team. So when Casey or Gibson Park puts up a box kick, if you've got Stockdale chasing after it, he's more of a weapon than Lowe is. And also when on the converse, when the receiving player will have less protection, and Stockdale's size and his aerial ability, you would think at this stage of his career will be a big asset for him. And that's coming in quite under the radar for this window. It's not happening at club level yet, but it's going to come in November. So the All Blacks will go after them in that area. Right. So that's a factor. It'll be a factor in Hansen's selection as well against Nash, who's a really good aerial player. So that's another thing to watch. But he's definitely got form and momentum, and I think he will play, because I think what we'll see in this window is, because it's 4 games in 4 weeks, there will be opportunities. But that snarl is back in Ulster. I think Richie's got that out of Ulster. I like it. I like seeing them the way they are at the moment. There's a bit of badness to them in a good way. So and Stockdale seems to have bought into it, and that's good.
He's recreating that nasty kicking competition vibe from Leinster days. Madigan versus Sexton. Look, Lowe's difficult to displace, but even if Stockdale at least has a great, couple of years at club and is going well and enjoying his career, I think that's a much nicer finish to what we felt it was headed towards a couple of years ago. Before we go, URC then. So I mentioned Munster still in South Africa. They have the Sharks, 3 o'clock Saturday. Leinster at home to the Lions, 5:15, and then Connacht and Ulster both in action Saturday evening, 7:35. Connacht have the Dragons in Galway and Ulster away to Cardiff. Brief word on Munster 19 Stormers 34 as they head to the Sharks. A couple of things. I'll throw them at you, Ian, and whichever one you want to pick up, do. The line-out is a problem this season, less than 80%. They lost 5 line-outs to Leinster, and people said, well, it's RG Snyman, that doesn't help. But then they go to Cape Town and they lose 8 of 14. And last year, their line-out of the 16 teams in the league was 13th. This is now a long-term problem for Munster, and Eben Etzebeth and Jason Jenkins potentially are in wait this weekend. So there's that. And then just the game itself. I mean, it's funny, you were talking there about coffees with Sexton and decision making. Like the concession of that first try, 5 minutes away from home, 5 minutes into the game in the 22, Tyke Byrne throws a bad pass behind Crowley. Crowley stretches for it. Stormers smell blood, and Crowley says, I'm going to chance like an on the spin offload, which was never on, intercept try. And you kind of like that's so sloppy. You know what I mean? For like test level players, are some of Ireland's best players. That's kind of hard to account for or explain.
Yeah, it was sloppy, and that comes back to what I was talking about earlier, knowing when to go for an offload like that. But I've been disappointed with some of Munster's play. I think back to the Zebra game, how they're communicating with each other in defence. It didn't look like there was any energy in that defensive line. Now, they have changed it, but that should be a non-negotiable. Then you look at how that first try came about. That pass from Tig to Jack is something that is practiced so many times in a week. That should not happen with 2 of your best players. If it does happen, it's time that you cut the cloth and you just carry into heavy bodies and you recycle the ball and you go again. You don't go for a low percentage play like that. And I did think that Crowley looked like a guy who was trying to put a marker down. He was, definitely feeling a bit of pressure with Froley playing well the week before. And he wanted to put a big performance down. Ultimately, he had a poor performance by his usual high standards. He's thrown 2 intercepts. He's kicked the ball pretty poorly. And, there was a few other mistakes washed in there. For me, you're 5 games in for Munster, and the messaging coming out has been kind of strong in the sense that, we'll come together, we'll work our way through that. You certainly don't want to be having those conversations with the press after 5 weeks. But the reality is they've come away with 1 league point from their 3 away games this year. So they've put themselves under massive pressure against the Sharks this week. If the Sharks beat them, they'll pass them out in the league. Munster are then dropping suddenly to 13th. You can leave yourself a mountain to climb in this league as you move into the second half of the season. And it doesn't get any easier in Europe with coming up against the likes of Saracens. So this is a really, really important game. Like, to think that 6 games into the season, you're talking about must wins. It does have that feel to it. And then with the league as well, the other side to it, you can get unlucky when you come up against certain teams. And the URC is quite different to the Premiership and the top 14 in that sense, because you could get the South African teams when they don't have their internationals. You can come up, against other teams when they've got an injury crisis or a separate international window. And Munster have been unlucky. Like, the Stormers got off to a slow start. That was a must-win game for them at home, and they won it.
Yeah.
This is a very important game for the Sharks. Whereas you look back at last season when Munster got the 10 points on the road, they got those South African teams at a good time.
Fair point. Munster, Rudd, what are we seeing?
Yeah, like the Zebra one is the one, isn't it? Like, you can kind of write off the other ones to some degree if you beat Zebra, but if you go and lose to Zebra in the way that they did, you've already put yourself in a bit of a hole. And then, like, the Leinster performance was a weird one because there was parts of that where they played quite well and they were blown away by what looks like the league's best team, who were just blowing everyone away. the scrum is a real issue, and Jeremy Loughman's picked up an injury now, and they're in real bother going to play against the team that has the Springboks front row. The Sharks have named their team early, and it's very, very impressive. They've got Ombanambi, they've got Vincent Koch, they've got Oxenche, they've got Etzebeth backing them up. It's Sia Khaleesi's at 8 this weekend, and then the backline has unbelievable pace. Now the Sharks
sounds like a great game, by the way.
It does. No, I think that even Leinster against the Lions is going to be a great game as well. But this is the great part of the URC. We're getting to see really good teams play against each other. Tyke Byrne, I thought it was interesting how Jean de Villiers, when he was interviewing Roundtree on TV, asked him specifically, is there too much burden being put on Tyke Byrne's shoulders as probably the team's best player, but also their line-out caller and their captain. I believe he might be carrying a bit of a hamstring as well. They need to look at how they're training. Are they training too hard, too fast? Do they need to taper that down and start looking at conserving energy for the games? Is that something that's playing into what's going on? They need to fix their set piece, but they're in the wrong place to do it because they're going up against a very good Sharks team on paper, but a team that doesn't always put it together. So I'd be worried about them, but not panicking at the same time. They've a tendency to put themselves in holes within season and play themselves out, and they have played 3 of the most difficult away fixtures of the season already. By the time they get to the end of this, it's the Zebra one that still will kill them because. If you win your first 3 and then lose the second 3, yes, you've lost momentum, but you can kind of explain them away. You've been to South Africa, you've been to Croke Park, you can regather it. If you lose the Zebra, you just put yourself under terrible pressure, and there will be pressure coming on because, as Ian said, they've got a tough enough European run. They're playing the English champions away. They're playing Saracens at home. They go to Cast on a Friday night. That's not going to be easy either. Then they've got derbies, so this doesn't get any easier. And while the injury list, there are players coming back, there's also a lot of players they're churning. It's been a very attritional start as well. Plus they've got their best players go away with Ireland now, so it's a worry. Definitely, I think Munster fans are justifiably worried because their squad or their team isn't as good as it was last year. So can they play? Are they good enough this year to play their way out of this hole? Because they have been in the last 2 years.
And you got
I think on that.
Sorry, shoot.
Yeah, I think on that, like a win this week solves a lot of that. You go into the November break, your tail's up. But the messaging out of the camp, it's one thing saying with words, we're tight, our culture's good. But then there's other ways that is measured, and your injury list actually quite often can dictate how happy your squad is. How hard are guys pushing to get back from injury? And then the other one I'll be keeping a close eye on is like the performance of the Munster players over the last 5-6 weeks versus how they then perform for Ireland. If you're seeing them performing far better for Ireland, maybe they're happier in that Irish camp than they are in the Munster one. And look, there was some musings around how Peter Mahoney was treated with his contract. How RG Snyman found out about his contract it not being there in Munster. Look, maybe they're rumours, maybe there is some truth in it. But a win will take the pressure off. A loss is going to stack it up. And as Rod said, there's a tough run of games coming for them. It doesn't get any easier.
You've got to shoot, so I'll get a word from you in Leinster and let you go if I can. They're in the habit of scoring early and often at the moment. Election season is upon us, and that's what they're doing. So against Connacht, Jamie Osborne after 5 minutes, then RG Snyman, who got player of the match, by the way, was to the fore, and Liam Turner's try on 15 minutes. And James Ryan try on 22 minutes was disallowed, but it could have easily been 21-0. And even when Connacht did manage to score, Leinster responded straight away. So they never actually, after the 14th minute, relinquished a double-digit lead. And that's kind of their MO at the moment. Paul Boyle as well was talking about their defence. He was saying, such a powerful defence, they're flying at you. Our focus going into the game was to stay calm on the ball. That is easier said than done. And he was paying tribute to Ringrose as well. He said, Gary Ringrose, one of the best defenders at 13 you can come up against. Yeah, he missed 7 tackles, but he shoves you back into the man inside you. So they kind of look, in the way that like the vibe around Munster is a little bit question marky, starting to get very good vibe around Leinster this season. There's kind of a men on mission aspect to how they're looking.
It does have that feel to it. And I think, had Leinster won, let's say, 2 European Cups in the last 3 years, and 2 leagues over the last 3 years, not a whole lot would change in the sense of how they've performed over those seasons. They have performed really well. They have not won trophies. This is an incredibly good Leinster side. And because they haven't won trophies, people don't realise how good they are. Um, I think this could be the year that it clicks for them. We talk about the second year with Niambar, um, and the defensive impact that that's going to have. Their defense looks phenomenally strong. When you've got the likes of Boyle coming out and speaking about how tough it is to play against that Leinster defence. I know we're still going to see some missed tackles, but we spoke about it last week.
Yeah.
Their defensive line is getting so high up the pitch, and it's just very hard to find space. You got to keep going back down the short side. You got to keep relying on short passes. You're relying on moments of brilliance to try and break them down. And then on the other side of the ball, Snyman was just phenomenal. Like 7 offloads. It was like man against boys, and he's very quickly becoming one of the best players in the league. It'll be very interesting to see how South Africa use him in the November internationals. And again, you talk about happy culture. Like he's playing particularly well. He's fit. The same thing happened with Jenkins when he went from Munster to Leinster. So it is an interesting one. I think.
You don't want to get too holistic about all this, but are you saying just some part of you believes in happy mind, happy body, good environment, etc. when it comes to injuries? You're kind of intimating that, I think, in different ways. You buy into that?
Yeah, I am. And when you come under pressure as a coach, the temptation is to train harder, to train for longer, to train more. You rotate your squad less because you want to rely on your key guys, and you can end up overplaying them. One big change that we've seen with Leo Cullen this year, for let's say you compare it to the Leinster team that went to South Africa last year, he rotated too heavily. They ultimately weren't able to get the job done. He's still used large parts of his squad this year. There's 5 academy players in the 23 at the weekend, but it was mixed with experienced internationals. He seems to be figuring out the blend that is needed to win these URC games. The bar is rising all the time in the league. You can't roll out your young guns like you were able to do 10 years ago. You need to have a mix, and I think that's something that Leo's got right so far this season, and it's keeping the squad fresh and competitive.
Okay, going to let you go. Much like Johnny Sexton, you have a real job, so going to let you go.
I do. Back on the ship. Yeah. Joe, absolute pleasure. Rod, great to catch up.
Cheers, Ian. Thank you.
Yeah, see you next week.
Yeah, likewise. Cheers. That was brilliant. Ian Madigan with us. Rory, I heard you speaking after Leinster Munster, and you really liked what you'd seen from Leinster, and you're sharing that sense that actually something's brewing here.
Yeah, there's a couple of things. They haven't been far away, but I did think they dipped last year. I thought between the impact of trying to change their defence, the fact that most of the players had peaked for a World Cup, and then were trying to get back to that level all year and never really did. Their attack always looked a bit clunky for me, and in the end, while they were a drop goal away from beating Toulouse, I was never convinced last year that they were going to do it. I just always felt like they were chasing something, and I wasn't impressed with them during some of the knockout games. Yes, brilliant against La Rochelle. That win over there was great. This year, after a pre-season with Nienaber, the influence of Blyndal, who has played under Nienaber at Munster and has come in and given them a couple of new ideas, just changed things. The fitness and form of the players, and then the addition of a superstar. He's an upgrade on Jason Jenkins. He's an upgrade on anyone really, and he looks like he's loving it. They've only one game. This Lions game is the last game. Well, it's the last game they won't have Jordy Barrett on board. So you're going to put him into the mix after the November internationals. And the All Blacks put up a clip on Instagram yesterday of Jordy Barrett's very close, I'd say, by playing Dublin. He's that injury is not going to rule him out for long. They look cohesive. They look confident. They're enjoying themselves. They're getting to a point now where teams are going to start putting B teams out against them because they know they can't beat them. And that is a very good place to be in the URC, because what Ian said is very true. But if you're Edinburgh and you're going, we've got to go to Dublin next week, and then we're at home to someone the following week, well, we're going to keep our players back. And then it just gets easier and easier for Leinster. They'll top the table, which gives them that nice home run. Obviously, when it comes to the crunch, they need to perform and they need to beat big teams, because Toulouse are already looking very, very good. Bordeaux are an excellent side. They've got La Rochelle in the pool. They haven't gone away. Northampton are there's a couple of good English teams, although I think they're better than any of the teams in England. So they've got to get it right at the day. But right now, they look like the best team in Europe. Toulouse are there as well, and if we get that matchup again, it will be magic. But yeah, like they're just so complete right now and so hard to play against. It looks like they're absolutely no fun to play against. Connacht did a lot right on Saturday and just still couldn't get anywhere. That win didn't help, but they're such a good outfit now.
Okay, interesting. And very last word then on Connacht. So they've had 3 interpros. I mean, they must be a bit kind of like sick of this. And I guess they didn't get the bonus point. Obviously, Leinster held them to 2 tries, which nobody else has done thus far. Like coming into the game, there was a degree of, geez, against Ulster, against Munster, you know, you're doing really well and it's great, but you're coming out the wrong side of these games, and then Leinster are that bit ahead of everybody. But are we happy enough with what we're seeing from Connacht as things settle down?
I think they're a great team to watch, and I'd say they're quite an enjoyable team to play against. And that's not, you want to be one, but you don't want to be the other.
Okay.
They're too soft in defence and too easy to play against. And I think a lot of teams are going to end up writing off games against Leinster. The problem the Irish provinces have is they have to play Leinster twice and no one else does. Just the way the league is structured. They have the Dragons this weekend. Yeah. If they win that, they're 3 from 6. Pretty good, you know, and with a couple of bonus points picked up along the way.
Bonus points have added up. Like it was akin to winning one if they'd beaten Munster,
which they should have done. Yeah, they should have won that game. They'll look at that. Ulster, they should have won.
Yeah, but they got 4 bonus points, I think.
They did, but then you know, when you look at the fact that they were in better form than those teams at those moments, then they didn't make it count.
True,
and when
true.
Look, they're in the Challenge Cup this year, which means they can rotate their squad out. Like they don't have to worry about the Champions Cup like everyone else does. So they can target the URC like none of the other Irish teams. So that's a really strong position. They currently have really good attacking players who are fit. I think they are a really good team, well set up. They have a big Achilles heel. They're too easy to score against. It's a pretty fundamental one. Yeah. It was a big problem last year, and I think it sapped their belief as the season went on. I think it just, between the injuries to Mac Hansen and a couple of other things, but also the fact that they knew no matter what they did scoring-wise, they weren't able to keep the other team at bay. It almost sapped their attacking belief as well. So they need to get that defensive thing right. They have a nice window. They have a few lads in the Ireland squad, but the majority of the squad will have a month really to prepare for a fixture against Munster at the end of November, when Munster will probably have more team players involved in the Australia game. Bit of momentum into the Challenge Cup, bit of mix and match there. Then they can attack those Christmas interpros when other provinces have to send lads on holiday because the Irish lads have to have a break. So there is a chance for Connacht to pick off points, but they've got to get better in defence. They can't be this easy to play against.
Okay. Very good. I told Ronan we would do 35 minutes, and here we are, coming up on 55. So too much to talk about. You have a piece with Sean O'Brien in the paper on Saturday, or online as well, obviously. So interesting to hear from him. Ruaidhri O'Connor, thank you.
Thank you, Joe.